Dennis Stevens, executive leader, entrepreneur, and founder of OrgRite, joins us today on The Communicative Leader. Dennis shares his wealth of experience regarding organizational adaptability and innovation, especially via agile transformation and AI. Let's dive in and have some fun. Hello, and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Dennis, thank you for joining me today on The Communicative Leader. I'm really excited to learn more about what you do and your perspective, and it's so cutting edge. And before we get into that, what led you to be this expert in organizational adaptability, AI integration, and agile transformation?
Yeah, good afternoon, Lee. It's very good to talk to you as well. I know I said afternoon, but good morning. So I started out with technology consulting like 30 years ago. My first job was designing probabilistic systems for marketing platforms for IBM,
Okay.
which even then was like a form of AI. And we were developing these large-scale innovative solutions using emerging technologies to roll out there. I went into 2 or 3 different companies from there where I did predictive maintenance systems for handhelds. I did remote sensing systems for precision agriculture. So sort of always doing new technologies as they're emerging and learning how to deploy them in a way that was safe. So there's a lot of risk, markets uncertain, products uncertain, technologies uncertain. You have to develop in smaller batches and then validate them with the customer all the time. There's also a really interesting part that came out of my early work was I was also ended up being responsible for people actually using the technologies that we built. So the organizational change management piece became really important. How do you get people, how do you understand jobs, design the jobs with the new technology, and get people to start to adapt them and leverage them? So I went back to college and got my degree in organizational psychology and development, and was really focused on the change management part of it. And it was useful not just from a technology standpoint, but it was useful from leading teams and leading customers, right? So you learn how people to build teams and how to build organizations. In 2005, I started a company called Synaptis, and that was doing large-scale organizational design and technology design using business capability modeling to design customer alignment, wrapping technology and organization so they were aligned. And I've got an HBR article, The Next Revolution in Productivity, that talks a lot about leveraging that to build adaptable and composable organizations. But again, the implication or the application of that required a tremendous amount of effort to get leaders to understand how to change and adapt. We could make it technically possible. We could design it and make it possible. Right, but getting people to actually play
those
was
pesky
really
people.
an interesting
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in 2012, I co-founded a company called Leading Agile, and Leading Agile does large-scale agile transformations. And I got to lead about 150 agile transformations, actually figuring out how to get leaders to understand how to participate in that over the last 12 years. And so the change management model that I started at Synaptis to start to solve that problem became a critical part of what we did then at Leading Agile. What I found out as we were wrapping up at Leading Agile was leadership is still a challenge. Leaders don't know how to lead their organizations and how to participate in change. And so I founded OrgRite because I think the coaching, consulting led change is going to fail as change becomes faster and faster. And I think we have to teach our leaders how to design organizations and lead organizations that can adapt to change. So that's kind of what OrgRite is targeted at, empowering organizations to change rapidly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you as an organizational scholar, and I specialize in leadership. And I think there's such a disconnect because I think many leaders implicitly believe they need to know everything. They need to know the way to show the way, and embracing change and that uncertainty kind of throws that old idea to the wind. And it's really a scary place to be, I think, for many of those who have come up under a different model.
That's right. I think that the way that we treat, I talk about the messy middle in organizations
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times. And the way that we create that in organizations is by punishing people with undisciplined change and then holding them accountable for delivering results in misaligned, not well-designed organizations. And then these middle managers become very defensive, very resistant to change because they're trying to keep their jobs, take care of their families, be successful. And we put them in really challenging situations.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that messy middle. Gosh, so apt, unfortunately. So, Dennis, you've kind of touched on this a little bit in your background, but I'm wondering if you can give us your perspective on what organizational adaptability means today when technology, markets, I mean, just about everything we can imagine is shifting at such a rapid pace.
Yeah, so organizational adaptability is the ability of a company to respond swiftly and effectively to changes in the market, technology, and customer preferences. So can I design my organization to be able to respond to changes that are coming? And I think there's some key elements that we can observe as we look at companies. And one of them is just the org design itself. Is it structured in a way that decision-making is clear and rapid, and that the team dynamics are fluid so we can redirect the organization? I think the malleability of the technology is incredibly important. And I think this concept of informed decision-making. So one of the challenges that we have in organizations is the only people that have all the information and understand all the consequences are at the top of the stack.
Yeah.
So meaningful decisions have to go to the top of the stack. One of the things we have to figure out if we're going to be adaptable is how to get data and insights deeper into the organization, closer to the work surface, so people can make decisions that are aligned with the market, customer needs, and strategic intent, and do it in a relatively safe way. There's a cadence of purposeful interactions as well, which is one of the things, at Agile, we talk about stand-ups and retrospectives and reviews and all these events, but those events are meaningful routines. They're on a cadence interactions to radiate information and express intent. It doesn't get implemented that well in most organizations, but the intent of those interactions is built in there. So organizational adaptability is just ready to pivot quickly in response to changes. And so the whole company can change as changes come up.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking of like the ship analogy that we use a lot, and two, the importance of data-driven decisions at every level. And when we implement that, how the norm of an organization would completely change. And I would imagine much more empowerment at other levels below, our senior leaders, which would be really powerful.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is many sense that many leaders are afraid to delegate decisions and give information down the stack as it won't be interpreted correctly, or they don't have all the consequences they're responsible for. I think what's important to get senior leaders to understand is when you can guide and steer in this new organization, you're actually more influential and can create more success for everybody rather than clinging to it, delegating it increases your power.
Exactly. I know. I hear you on that one. So we're going to keep moving, and we're going to look at adaptability via Agile and AI. But before we kind of dive into the details there, can you introduce us to Agile? And I know AI is pretty well known now, but anything else that we kind of need as a foundation so going forward, we're on the same page?
Sure. Agile has a couple of different aspects to it. There's a sort of hard aspect to it. It's teams designed around business problems or customer needs that are able to have everything needed to deliver an increment of value, operating in a very disciplined cadence of developing and finishing things in smaller batches. It creates a lot of ability to respond to change and drive risk down early. And there's some soft aspects to Agile, which in the industry, in some regard, have overtaken the systemic aspects of Agile. But like a culture of collaboration and continuous learning, these interactions and rituals, transparency and safety. So those are kind of in the space, but somehow we don't always get the practical actions and get our leaders to understand how they can carefully form teams and guide how they interact, how adaptive planning, creating space or safety for learning Allows
Mm-hmm.
capacity and how the things that the leaders have to do to make it work, they're not getting educated on how it makes them more capable. So agile is small teams
Mm-hmm.
able to adapt rapidly and learn. So AI is interesting
Mm-hmm.
too, because what a lot of people look at AI and they think it's Chat GPT,
Mm-hmm.
or they think it's some of this new generative AI. But AI has been around for a long time. It's using algorithms and machine learning to enable machines to perform tasks that would normally be done by a human being. So things like data analysis and decision making, predictive analytics, those are all AI as well. When you watch a car driving down the road and your car is avoiding the
Mm-hmm.
sides, or not, that's AI, artificial
Yeah.
intelligence. It's not all
Yeah.
this generative. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what becomes interesting about AI is how does it apply to the human continuum of interaction? So some things
Mm-hmm.
are humans might reference AI for information. Some AI
Mm-hmm.
might assist with insights, like your car suggesting you don't pull into that lane and
Yes.
hit that car, but you're actually still in control,
Yep.
right? Or there's collaborative interactions where AI handles all the tasks and humans might
Mm-hmm.
oversee it. We're starting to see that in some of the new self-driving cars, where the cars are
Mm-hmm.
generally being driven by AI, but when an
Mm-hmm.
instance comes up that AI can't resolve, the human being takes over and drives the car. And then there's the full automation where AI operates independently. So there's a whole
Mm-hmm.
spectrum of items there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really helpful because you're. I think a lot of people say AI and equals ChatGPT, and they're one and the same. And it's. Thank you for expanding that for us.
There's
So,
there,
yeah,
there's one
go
more
ahead.
important thing in there
Yeah,
is just the difference between AI and what some people think AI is, which is this artificial general intelligence. Most of
yeah.
the AIs that we're using today are trained to do a specific task from a
Hmm.
specific perspective, and they're only
Mm-hmm.
allowed to operate within that narrow bound. So the large language models like ChatGPT are just trained with much bigger data sets, but it's still just predictive. It's not really learning on its own. And so this idea of
Mm-hmm.
AIs that are going to take over the world and control everything, that's a whole nother wave of things that doesn't exist yet. AGI is what people might rightfully have some concerns about, but it's several years in the future.
Okay. Okay, good. So we can sleep well for a little bit, a little bit
Yeah.
longer. So Dennis, you've kind of hinted at these things, and so now I'm wondering. You've talked about how you've been working with these learning models, and you've been on cutting edge technology for your whole career. And then I love that you went and brought in the people side with the org psychology degree. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about these kind of experiences that have led you now to say, I really appreciate this agile approach and I really appreciate AI learning in this way. And these two together, when we marry them, they're really helpful at looking at adaptability.
Yeah. So when you start to look at the ability to delegate decisions into teams,
Mm-hmm.
they can operate more autonomously, but do it in a very purposeful and disciplined way. So still aligned
Mm-hmm.
with the strategy, still aligned with intent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the agile practices are really effective at that. What we've lacked in some regard is the ability to have a third brain at the table, have all the other intent
Mm-hmm.
involved in all the decisions, because it's been very difficult to gather that information. I think at Synaptis we built small teams that were focused around specific problem domains.
Mm-hmm.
At Leading Agile, we started making those practices be really, really applied, but the gap was still the ability for people to understand the consequences and the considerations
Mm-hmm.
they should take for all the decisions being made. So decisions still stay too high in the organization. One of the
Okay.
things that AI has been able to give us is the
Mm-hmm.
ability to bring more information down and
Mm-hmm.
provide more meaningful sentiment and performance information up. So we're bridging a gap that was very difficult to bridge in
Mm-hmm.
the past.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I was even thinking too in terms of what that does for keeping knowledge in organizations when people at middle manager levels are feeling empowered and they're part of those conversations, even if it's in a tangential way. We have them training in very real ways for when there is other attrition or vacancies opening.
Yeah, that's actually a really important aspect. There's a part of that
Hmm.
on the agile side, which is one of the
Hmm.
things we do to make technology very malleable, is we write a lot of tests around it. So the tests can
Hmm.
survive developer transition,
Mm-hmm.
or a vendor coming in and building something and leaving. If the tests are there, then a lot of the knowledge about how things work and the surety that it's going to continue to work are
Mm-hmm.
built into the technology. This concept of maybe with AI we can start to build those sorts of digital twin understanding of our organization
Mm-hmm.
and maintain the information, but also are things operating the way they're supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Very insightful. So we've talked about Agile quite a bit, and you've talked to us about some of these core principles. And I'm wondering if you can let us know how you've seen some challenges that will pop up when we use Agile methodologies, and how organizations can kind of pivot and adjust to continue, steering that ship the way in which they want it to go.
Yeah, I think that when I look at the resistance we often run into,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's from the teams, but sometimes it's from leadership support. It's just resistance to change across the board, because people don't understand how they're going to be safe in the new model. And so the way that Agile gets implemented in a lot of places, first off, it's treating Agile as practices or training. We don't actually change the way that we interact or how decisions are made or how people are empowered.
Mm-hmm.
But we're doing these new things that the book says to do, but we're not
Mm-hmm.
really an Agile company. The second big failure mode that I see is when we treat change as an event. So
Oh.
people come in, they restructure, do a course,
Mm-hmm.
and leave,
Yeah,
but we
check it
haven't
off.
changed. Yeah,
Done.
we haven't changed how we
Yes.
relate to each other
Uh-huh.
and
Mm-hmm.
understand the problem. And I do think the outsourcing change to experts is a massive, has huge consequences, because
Mm-hmm.
our leaders don't know how to run the new system we've just installed, and it will
Yeah.
go back to what they understand if we don't do it through the leaders.
Yeah. 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 That is really, really helpful. And so now, thinking again about Agile, I'm wondering if you can share a successful case study with us when you have seen, and certainly you don't have to name names if you don't want to or aren't comfortable with, but when have you seen this really improve adaptability in an organization?
So we've got 100 measurable successes of doing this, but I'm going to pull
Mm-hmm.
out like a specific example
Great.
for it's a mid-sized bank
Okay.
in the Midwest, and they had acquired some other banks. They were growing pretty rapidly. They were adding new products to
Mm-hmm.
their product suite, and their IT department was really long timelines, system outages,
Oof.
inefficiency in delivering value to customers, and so they were trying to grow. They were positioned from a brand to grow, but they couldn't deliver on the brand promised because it was taking too long, and their technology was stopping them. What they didn't understand was that the way they designed their organization, funded and led their projects, was leading to that poor technology.
Mm-hmm.
So they invited us in to do a natural transformation. We
Mm-hmm.
restructured the teams around the business problems. We helped
Mm-hmm.
align the technology that was being leveraged to develop that to align with those teams. We
Mm-hmm.
put in a lot of adaptive planning and risk mitigation processes on the top,
Mm-hmm.
and then we put in some tools for doing analysis of the performance of the team versus their future expectations. So it was a bit of predictive analytics. If the team could do this in a
Mm-hmm.
short period of time, what can they do in the next period of time? How big is
Mm-hmm.
this problem? What should we actually expect to deliver? Because one of the problems you run into is you overload these teams with 10 times more things than they can deliver, and then
Yeah.
nothing gets delivered. So we want to be able to align them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went in there. What was really cool about this is we did it super, super strong CIO, super strong leadership team. He
Mm-hmm.
hired a lot of them as we were doing the transition. Everybody reapplied for their jobs
Okay.
in the new
Yeah.
teaming structure, so he was very involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
They quadrupled the amount of work they could get done in a period of time. They actually, in the first year, delivered twice as much as they were forecasted to, and they're already behind on their forecast.
Wow.
But they actually delivered everything they were going to 4 times. They went further down the roadmap than they ever imagined. Now, they didn't deliver everything on their roadmap because not everything
Mm-hmm.
was actually going to provide strategic value to them. So they were able to
Mm.
pick those most important things
Yeah.
and move the important things forward. And what's really cool about that is 8 or 9 years later, that CIO still has a great leadership team. They have a great culture.
Mm-hmm.
They've expanded and grown as new ideas come in or new technologies come in. They're able
Mm-hmm.
to absorb them and just roll with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the leading bank in that Midwest region that they're in, the markets that they're in. So they've been very successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so incredible. I love so much of that. I love the reapplying for a job because we want people who buy in, right? Because if this is not for you, then it's probably better if you self select out because it's going to be a different ride than the one you originally signed up for. And I like too that you acknowledge some of those initial strategic goals. Once they started performing, we recognize that this is not actually this needs to be adapted, or we have already blown this out of the water. What's next?
That's right.
And the pigs
Yes, very
quadrupled
powerful.
their output. Oh my goodness. Yeah, my brain just short circuits trying to think about if I could do 4 times the amount of work that I
Well,
currently
well,
am.
yeah, when you think about the amount of defects
Mhm.
and errors that are created when teams are not well formed and the technology is not well
Yes.
designed, and we don't know how to delegate intent, so we make bad
Hmm.
decisions. There's so much waste and churn in the organization. You just
Yeah.
smooth it out. Almost
Yep.
everybody doubles throughput. Almost everybody gets
Hmm.
significant improvements
Hmm.
right out of the box if you do it.
Hmm.
If you just leave everything in place the way that it was and don't fix your technology or your interactions
Yep.
and just call things by new names, you get the same results you've always gotten.
Yep. 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 That makes sense. And so my next question, so I kind of want to shift more into AI, and I think you've kind of already touched on this in the success example you just gave us when you were talking about tools for analyses, like throughout. But I'm wondering if maybe you expand on that. But I want to think about how AI it works in conjunction with these agile methods to
Yeah.
enhance that adaptability.
So I'm going to give you three different sort of places where AI is
Awesome.
really significant.
Yeah.
The the first place is we are seeing really significant improvements in quality and throughput for
Mm,
developers that are using AI effectively to help them develop
mm,
their code. Now, effectively actually means it requires more thinking about architecture and systems engineering and writing test cases. But
mm,
once you do the hard thinking and designing of the software,
mm.
AI is really good at writing the code, typing the code
Okay.
to
Yeah.
fulfill those things. When it's used poorly, people are asking it to do the design, not creating the constraints, not architecting it well.
Yeah.
You end up with a mess. So you have to use the code well, but when used well,
Hmm.
tremendous improvement, right? Um,
Yeah.
the second one that I think is really interesting, and it goes to this place around how do we get middle management to have the information they need to do a better job of delegating and empowering teams. This idea of
Hmm.
strategic empowerment.
Yeah.
And AI can go look at so much information and find patterns and bring it back. I
Hmm.
can use the abilities that we're seeing in some of the new AI tools to provide much better interaction models for middle managers. So
Mm,
enabling and elevating
mm,
the burden on middle managers is
mhm.
really important. The
Yep.
transparency that can come from that actually can bump into this conflict between defensive behaviors and trust. So
Mhm.
things are messed up. I can't tell people things are messed up because I'll get in trouble. But if I can
Yep.
keep it covered up and hide it long enough, maybe somebody else will mess up before I get caught.
Yep.
There, right? So there's
Uh-huh.
some risk in creating transparency in the data,
Yeah.
but getting it out there is
Yeah.
really useful because
Mhm.
then we can make better decisions. Very few executives actually want their organizations to be completely out of control, right? And they
Yep.
don't understand
Yep.
how awful it is.
Mhm.
And then just the concept of prioritizing
Mhm.
and delegating tasks and
Yep.
improving decision making by having the right. How am
Mhm.
I performing? What is my capacity?
Mhm.
Like all that's very interesting. We do a lot to really help middle managers. Then I think there's an interesting aspect of uh, a tool that I had started building before was reading project communications and trying to sense
Mhm.
the sentiment on the project. If I had 10 or 15
Mm.
projects going on, I couldn't
Yeah.
tell which one was in trouble. And
Mhm.
status reports were all there to obfuscate any risk or problem to keep me
Yes.
out of people's
Yeah.
business. And so
Yep.
there was no real value in it.
We're doing
But
great, boss. Yeah.
yeah, but what if I could read the Slack messages and the
Mhm.
emails and the
Yeah.
communications and analyze the data and have AI do some of that pattern matching? I
Yep.
think there's some really powerful use of tools to help us decide what to
Mhm.
pay attention to. Then the secret is we have to get our executives to then go. The problem is not the individuals. The problem is the design of the system I've put in place. What do I fix to improve
Yes.
the
Yep.
situation? But they
Yep.
actually are solving the real problem because they have insight into it. There's a balance there to get past that defensiveness and trust to creating that
Yes.
transparency.
Exactly. And like you said, then helping like that prioritizing and putting in those systems to continue to grow middle managers so
Yes.
that we cut down on, yeah, that's phenomenal. I'm working on a paper right now called Stuck in the Middle, and it's all about middle managers. And they have some extra autonomy, but not very much. And they're encouraged to be transparent, but they can't share too much. So it's just that is a tricky position to be in organizations. So I love when people like you are doing really cool things to help reward them and continue to train them and empower them.
Yeah, they should be the leverage point that we're using to
Yeah. Oh, I
grow our
love that.
organization.
Yeah.
And instead they're the messy middle, they're the frozen middle.
Yeah.
They're the problem, but they're the problem because we put them in an impossible job.
Yes. Yep. Agreed. So this is a nice segue to ethical consideration. So what are some things that organizations, that their senior leaders, some questions that people should be asking and thinking about when they're integrating AI into operations, especially when we're thinking about team dynamics and decision making?
Right. So there's a whole big topic around bias and fairness in the data. Like I talked about earlier, all these AIs you're using today, they've all been trained by somebody, and they've all been trained with data and a perspective that absolutely brings bias. And it's just, now bias itself is not bad, because if it keeps you from making a bad choice, that's good. Like it keeps you from driving into the car next to you. That's a bias,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yep.
interpreting data that's not desirable over this other condition. But there's the balance of sort of fairness in it, and how it impacts the brand of the company becomes very interesting. So you really have to stop and think about the decisions and the interactions you're having AI do, and analyze it to think about ways that it could possibly be going wrong, and have governance in place to be auditing and paying attention to mitigate those
Yeah.
biases. You can't just go buy it off the shelf, throw it into your customer center, and have people start using it. You have to really have disciplined governance in place, paying attention to it. There's a bunch of stuff around privacy and data security, which is also really critical for executives to be thinking about. If you don't have your data under control, if you don't have the right PII rules and customer rules, if you don't have the right containers around access to data, AI can introduce some real risk. And so ethically, you're not supposed to be paying 4,000 people's mortgages by accident because you accessed data through a new tool. Right?
Oops.
It's a real story, right?
Oh.
You're not supposed to be saying horrible things out, or letting people's social security numbers out in the wild, right, or violating it. So all those things happen. And I think generally our data is so fragile in the world today that this is a chance for us to really investigate and tie down the data that we want to use, and then actually using AI, give responsible access to those tools, to that data, to that information, rather than giving people just raw access to it. So I think there's a balancing there, but you have to really understand it. Then the other one that I think is really interesting, and I don't have a good answer on, is the impact on employment. AI is going to replace some jobs. AI, does that mean it's going to displace some workers? Probably. Is it each individual's company ethical responsibility to create new jobs that get displaced? Or is it their responsibility to have programs to develop people so they can find new jobs? Or is it government's responsibility? Or is it each individual's personal responsibility? That's a really interesting, rich sort of category to go into.
Yeah.
Is the employment one. I personally think in the market today, you should be understanding how to make yourself AI ready, because I don't know if you can count on your company or the government to make decisions in your best interest. But it reminds me of when farming became automated, and we went from having all these people on farms to people moving to the cities and taking manufacturing jobs and getting new education. They started requiring you go to high school until the 10th grade. So everybody had to have like an employable level of skills to be able to move into the new market. And there was a disruption for a moment, but we actually landed in a pretty good place. Overall, the quality of life went up, the economy went up, people's lives were generally better. But I think that's a really, really gray area that doesn't get enough attention. But it's not a reason. It's not a reason to stop it, because Because here's the other thing: if we don't do it here in the U.S., there are other countries that are probably going to do it, and will take a less
Yeah.
ethical approach to it, and will
Yeah.
actually hinder us. So it's
Yes.
complicated space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And one that I think changes every day. And
Yep.
there's so many different, like you said, so many different perspectives and levels. And imagine one we're going to be talking about for a long time, which is probably good. Like you said, if we're thinking then bringing in governance in a way as well.
That's right.
So, Dennis, this question's really for me as a leadership scholar. I am really interested in the work that you do. And I'm wondering, across all of these different organizations that you've worked with, all of these leaders, what are the traits that you're seeing that are being really crucial to foster that culture of adaptability and innovation in, the ever-changing organization of today?
Yeah, leadership becomes less and less at a certain level about
Mm-hmm.
being the best person in that particular job. Jobs are
Mm-hmm.
more complicated, require a lot more interaction. Jobs are changing
Yeah.
frequently, so you can't stay ahead. So I have a list of things that I try to build curriculum around and teach to leaders. The first
Mm-hmm.
one is just this concept of systems thinking.
Yeah.
So looking at the
Mm-hmm.
problem instead of looking as a small local problem, what are some tools and techniques for looking at it as a bigger, more holistic problem? And what are
Mm-hmm.
some frameworks for that? I think that there was stuff, when I was young, Peter Senge was out, Argyris was
Yeah.
out there. There were all these people
Yep.
having deeply thoughtful discussions around organizational design as a system.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we see it as frequently in leadership today. It becomes
No.
about P&L
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
plans and accountability. And so I think there's a challenge there. And I wonder why that's not critical. But the people that I
Mm-hmm.
see that are naturally systems thinkers, or that you can get them to start to think differently, become much more effective leaders. And I think it becomes a more important skill as we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think strategic thinking, which is different than systems thinking, strategic thinking is
Yeah.
given limited capacity, limited dollars, and a strategic intent, what
Mm-hmm.
trade-off decision am I going to make? I think that leaders that can't make strategic decisions end up working on everything at the same time and delivering nothing, end up telling everybody it's all
Mm-hmm.
going to be fine, but it isn't really fine, right?
Yep.
I think that
Mm-hmm.
ability to thoughtfully consider, that decision you made to give that person a $5,000 bonus for finishing that job was not a $5,000 decision. It was a $100,000 decision because I have 20 other people that will do the same thing in the next year.
Yep.
Like, we have to get people to think strategically.
Mm-hmm.
I think EQ and EQI
Yeah.
becomes really, really important. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me. The one thing that people can uniquely do that computers can't do as well as people is be human. And so
Mm-hmm.
getting really good at being human. How do I feel
Yep.
about this? How do they feel about it? How can I respond to that? How can I help them respond to it? These
Yep.
ideas around EQ are critically
Mm-hmm.
important. And then I think there's some things around uh, imagining the future instead of nailing things down. So some tools and time in the day to imagine what might be possible. So sort of the
Yeah.
concept of visionary thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yep.
the last one I'm going to put in there is just team dynamics and social dynamics in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think enough emphasis goes into managing team dynamics and how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
If I design the team right, get the right expectations on that team, develop the right competencies within them, and then start to delegate with intent, I can get those teams to do dramatically better contribution than they're probably doing today. And they're probably happier in their jobs. And it's more fun to lead a team that's set up right than is one you're fighting with every day. So that how do you create the conditions for healthy teams is really, really important. And I think all these skills can be taught, right?
Yeah. I agree. I completely agree with you. And I'm just thinking about what a powerful force that would be if someone can bring this in and thinking, that systems thinking, but integrate it with the strategic and the EQ and the visionary and team dynamics. I mean, I would put my CV in the ring for that organization any day to work with someone who's doing that. Yeah, that's really incredible. I was thinking of some research I did with team dynamics, and essentially what we walked away was the relationship you have with, if you're the title leader with your employees is important, but just as important, the perceptions they all have about the relationships, right?
Right.
We don't always operate from what is reality, in quote marks, because we need to recognize that people are really savvy discerners of these interactions and they make different assumptions. And the more that we can connect with individual employees, but also as the team, the better we're going to be.
There's a tool that I teach leaders called inference hacking. And it requires you to thoughtfully have empathy for the other people in the room. But in empathy hacking, I take Arger's or Schoen's ladder of inference.
Yeah.
And I go, here's the action I'm seeing, here's the beliefs. And I walk down to why would that make sense to them? Like why would that behavior be what they think is right? And if you can't understand that, you can't lead them. So
exactly.
I want to walk down. I want to walk down the ladder of inference. I want to find it with them. Then I want to explore how to reframe the problem for them or me or both of us, so we can reach a better conclusion. That's a very practical, applied mental model that you can use to go have those conversations.
Yeah. And think about enhancing your EQ and that strategic thinking then. When we're able to think like others, the system works better. Yeah. I love how you tie those all together in such a beautiful way. So my two final questions for you, Dennis, these kind of are intertwined. So the way we end all of our episodes of The Communicative Leader is with advice first for our formal leaders out there, managers, directors, CEOs, those folks, who are truly tasked with that decision making, the accountability of it. So it can be advice, it can be a tip, it can be a challenge. And then the second part is then, those tips or challenges for employees of all ranks across industries. So what do you have for them?
So for the title leaders, I'm going to say it's crucial to understand that organizational systems produce precisely what they are designed to produce. And your job as a leader is to design that system. If you're not getting out of the organization what you want out of the organization, you need to understand why you're creating the conditions for that to be how people are operating. Yep. There's, again, hard aspects to it and there's soft aspects to it. And there's ways to think about it. That ladder of inference is a soft tool that you can use to evaluate that. But you are getting the result that you and your leadership team have created because the system that you've produced.
Yeah.
The one that I think is really interesting, and so your job is to create an environment where people are aligned, they understand their role, and people feel safe to act decisively. So you have to be able to trust them. So that means you have to understand what it would mean to have a trustworthy team and how you can establish that. And those go into those other topics. For general employees, I think there's two parts to this one. I had two different answers I kind of went back and forth on. But your leaders don't trust you and treat you, micromanage you, hold you in space that you don't want to be in because you don't operate in a trustworthy fashion. What would it look like to become able to build a trusted relationship with your leadership, to understand their needs and what they're trying to accomplish and how you can help them be successful, how you can help your organization be successful and elevate your leader? I don't think we sit and think about that very often when we're just trying to get through our day. So employees want to be trusted. They have to figure out how to be trustworthy. The other one I was going to go was a little less dramatic than that. It was just, if you're an employee of any organization today, go figure out what AI is, the ways to leverage, how to talk about it, how to think about it, because you're going to need those skills in the near term, relatively soon. And the more empowered and able you are to do basic AI things, the more likely you are going to be still employed in 6 months or 9 months. But there's some mobility you have to be looking for. So start to envision that and figure out how to get that training and how you want to participate in the next phase of these companies as they change.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, really helpful, Dennis. And with that, are there places you kind of refer people to if they're saying, hey, I want to think about that? Is there, some trustworthy, even if it's just dipping a toe, sites or resources that would be helpful?
Yeah, what I can probably do, of course, I would say go to orgrite.com.
Yes.
Um, and these are the things that I'm talking about there. Because it's nascent,
Perfect.
it's not as well developed. But there's some content out there. There's an organization called the Agile Network that I can also
Okay.
point you to. If somebody's interested, reach
Okay.
out to me and I'll send you a
Yeah.
code for that. But the Agile Network is a developing network of experts. They picked 50 experts from worldwide to help develop the next evolution of Agile on the Agile Network. I'm one of those experts, and we're
Awesome.
talking about these. And you can go subscribe and participate in
Yeah.
that community. It's very interesting.
Very cool. Oh, I imagine. I imagine that is a huge responsibility, but also for someone with your training and experience, a whole lot of fun to be a part of that, shaping that conversation.
Yeah, it's nice to do meaningful work, right?
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Well, Dennis, I have had such a blast with you today. I've learned a lot. I know this conversation is going to be really helpful for our listeners. So thank you again for sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come on and share my thoughts. This was very enjoyable.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.